The perfect life. That wasn't from the outside. My aunt's life looked ideal. She had what most people would call a good marriage, a dependable husband, a clean house, friendly smiles at neighborhood barbecues, the kind of life people point to and say, now that's stability. But if you looked a little closer, you'd notice something missing, not in the furniture, not in the schedule, but in her eyes. Because stability without intimacy becomes silence. Her husband wasn't cruel, he wasn't abusive, he just existed next to her. Same breakfast, same routine. Same way he walked in the door, gave a polite hello and sat in his usual chair. Reliable, yes. But romance, conversation, curiosity, those things had long left the room. Over time, the love that once felt warm turned into habit, a checklist of chores, a list of bills, a rhythm so predictable it lulled them both to sleep, emotionally at least. And my aunt? She started to feel like background noise in her own life, unseen, unfelt, like she had become a supporting role in a story. She once co-wrote, "You see, the danger of a perfect life is that it can be too quiet, too composed, so polished on the surface no one thinks to ask what's really going on underneath." Neighbors called them the perfect couple. They saw the garden, the smiles, the manners, but they never saw the emptiness in between. And maybe that's the scariest part. When the world celebrates your life right at the moment, you begin to question if you're really living it at all. The quiet cracks you can't see, until they break everything. At first, the change was so small no one noticed. Not her friends, not her husband, maybe not even herself. It began with a question, whispered in the quiet hours of her own mind. Is it selfish to want more because on paper she had everything? A stable home, a husband who didn't mistreat her, a life that looked good enough. But good enough isn't the same as truly alive, and that difference. It started to gnaw at her slowly, then all at once. She began to dress up more, not for anyone else, but for herself. Lingering longer in front of the mirror, noticing the curve of her smile, the sadness in her eyes. Moments that used to blur together now felt sharpened by an ache she couldn't name. Meanwhile, her husband stayed the same. Same routines, same dinner, same silence. Physically present, emotionally a miles away. He didn't ask what was on her mind. He didn't notice she lingered by the window longer than usual, or that she paused before answering his questions, as if wondering if honesty even mattered anymore. Friends still admired them. Such a solid couple, they'd say. She's lucky. And maybe she was, in all the ways that don't feed the soul, because what no one saw was the slow erosion of intimacy, the way a heart can starve for connection even when there's food on the table, the way silence, when stretched too long, begins to sound like a scream. And here's the truth most people miss. Cracks don't start loud. They begin quietly. Like hairline fractures in the foundation of a house, invisible, until one day everything shifts and nothing feels solid anymore. The stranger who made her feel seen. Again, sometimes the moment that changes everything doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with a simple question in a quiet cafe. "Excuse me, do you know if they serve espresso here?" That was it. That was the sentence, spoken by a tall, confident black American man with a voice as warm as his smile. He didn't flirt, he didn't try to impress. But the way he looked at her, really looked, it was like he noticed something even she had forgotten about herself. She stumbled through a polite reply, embarrassed by her own reaction. Why was she flustered? Why did his presence linger, long after he'd walked away? Days passed, and then she saw him again at the grocery store, on a walk at the park. Coincidence? Maybe. But each time their conversations stretched a little longer, reached a little deeper. He didn't ask about her chores. He didn't ask what she was making for dinner. He asked what made her laugh, what she loved as a child. What she dreamed about when no one was watching. She didn't realize how starved she was for those kinds of questions, and with each answer, something stirred inside her, a part of herself that had been asleep for years. He didn't touch her, didn't push boundaries. He simply listened with a kind of presence that felt rare and safe. She started smiling more, lingering in moments she used to rush past. For the first time in what felt like forever, she didn't just feel like someone's wife. She felt like a woman again, seen, heard, remembered. And isn't it wild how a stranger can sometimes notice you more than the person who sleeps beside you every night? When it's just a text. Until it isn't, it started with something small. A text message. Hope your day was good. Simple. Harmless. Or so it seemed. She stared at the screen longer than she should have, not because of what he said, but because of how it made her feel. Seen, thought of, remembered. And so she replied. That one reply turned into a conversation, then another. And before she realized it, they were talking every day, not just about the weather or errands, but about dreams, regrets, emotions she hadn't spoken aloud in years. She told him things she hadn't even told herself. And when he responded, not with advice, but with presence, she felt something shift. It wasn't just attention. It was emotional intimacy, a kind she hadn't felt in her marriage in a long, long time. He made her feel admired, not for being a good wife or a responsible woman, but for being her. He called out parts of her she thought had died, her wit, her depth, her softness. She told herself it was innocent, just conversation, just a friend who listened better than most. But deep down she knew. She knew because her heart started racing when his name lit up her phone. She knew because she reread his messages before bed. She knew because she found herself keeping secrets, not from him, but from the man who slept beside her every night. That's the thing about emotional affairs. They don't knock down doors. They find the cracks and quietly move in, and once they do, what's left untouched starts to feel even more distant. The moment. Everything changed. There's a moment in every forbidden story when the line is no longer blurry. It's crossed, and once you step over it, you can't pretend you didn't. For her, it was a quiet cafe out of town, a place chosen, not just for its coffee, but for the privacy it offered. When she arrived, he was already there, smiling, warm, familiar. She told herself it was just coffee, just conversation. But deep down, she knew their time together was effortless. He didn't rush her, didn't push, but in the spaces between laughter and silence, a tension grew. And when their hands brushed, it didn't feel like an accident. It felt inevitable. When it finally happened, it wasn't wild or chaotic. It was slow, tender, a quiet storm of everything she'd buried for years, now rushing to the surface. She felt wanted, held, seen in a way that no longer existed in her marriage. But as soon as the moment ended, the weight of it came crashing in. Guilt, sharp and immediate, but not enough to erase the strange sense of awakening. She couldn't lie to herself anymore. This wasn't just emotional, this was betrayal. But it was also the first time in years she had felt alive. Their affair didn't stop. It deepened, emotionally, physically, spiritually. Each meeting felt like stolen time, borrowed from a version of life she was never meant to have. And yet, she craved it. But with every embrace came a whisper of consequence. She would return home haunted by the softness of his voice, then sit beside her husband, pretending not to feel fractured inside. She was split. One part still loyal to a life she built, the other drawn irresistibly to the man who made her feel like more than just a wife. And in that split, she discovered a truth no one warns. You can love someone but still betray them when you've stopped recognizing yourself in the mirror. The truth never stays quiet. It always starts with something small. A glance, a hesitation, a message that flashes across the screen at the wrong moment. He saw it. Just a few words, innocent enough on the surface, but not to a husband who's already sensing something slipping. Not when the silence in the house has become deafening. She froze. Not because of what he saw, but because deep down, she knew this moment was coming. The unraveling had already begun long before the text. This was just the match to the fuse. He didn't scream at first, he just asked, "Is there someone else?" And in that question, a lifetime of trust stood trembling. She nodded, couldn't lie, didn't want to. Not anymore. Then came the storm. Not just between them, but in the quiet town they lived in, where whispers travel faster than truth and judgment hits harder than any betrayal ever could. Neighbors who once praised their perfect marriage stopped making eye contact. Friends vanished, or worse, stayed to gossip. Family members called with voices lined with shame or anger. She wasn't just a woman who made a mistake. She became the woman who destroyed her own home. But what no one saw was the years of silence she had endured. The loneliness she had tried to bury beneath routines and dinner plates. The ache of being unseen day after day. None of that justified her choices, and she knew it. But it made them understandable, if only to herself. What hurt most wasn't the judgment. It was the look in her husband's eyes, not hatred, but heartbreak, not fury, but disbelief. She had rewritten the story of their marriage, not with cruelty, but with desperation. And in doing so, she lost more than just trust. She lost the version of herself who believed in forever. The quiet rebuilding. In the end, it didn't last. Not the affair, not the thrill, not the version of herself that had felt so alive in his arms. When the chaos faded, when the whispers died down, all that was left was silence. And in that silence came clarity. The relationship with the other man couldn't survive the weight of guilt, the wreckage of betrayal. It ended not with a fight, but with a quiet understanding. They were never meant to last, because what they had was built not on truth, but escape. The separation from her husband wasn't immediate. It came after long, tear-filled conversations, after nights of questioning and mornings that felt like mourning. But in those raw moments, she did something most never do. She stopped blaming the circumstances and started taking responsibility. Yes, he had been emotionally distant. Yes, the marriage had been hollow for years, but she had chosen silence when she should have spoken. She had sought answers in someone else instead of within herself, and that was the turning point. Because for the first time, she understood. No one could fill the emptiness she carried. No compliment, no kiss, no connection, not even love, could substitute the fulfillment that comes from truly knowing who you are. It wasn't about passion. It wasn't about being seen. It was about learning to see herself, to forgive the version of her that settled, to mourn the girl who waited too long, and to begin again, not as a wife or a lover, but as a woman, healing. She didn't rush into anything after that, didn't chase a new beginning. She sat with the stillness, listened to the ache, and slowly, painfully, began to rebuild. Not to prove anything to anyone, but to finally meet herself without pretending. The fall that taught her to rise. Sometimes it takes the worst mistake of your life to finally meet the person you were always meant to be. The affair cost her everything, her marriage, her reputation, the trust of the people she once called family. But beneath the wreckage of that collapse, she found something no one else could give her: clarity. For years, she had lived on autopilot, polite, polished, responsible. But deep down, she had ignored her own needs, her voice, her truth. She'd believed that being a good wife meant sacrificing the parts of herself that needed attention. She smiled through the numbness. She silenced the ache. But when the fallout finally stripped everything away, when there were no more illusions to hide behind, she had no choice but to sit with what was left: herself. And that's where the real journey began. She didn't romanticize the affair. She didn't pretend it was noble, but she acknowledged it for what it was: a wake-up call, not just about her marriage, but about her emotional honesty, her fear of confrontation, her deep, aching need to feel alive again. So she made a vow, not to anyone else but to herself, to never abandon her feelings again, to speak even when her voice trembled, to love but never lose herself in the name of love. The scars? They remain, but they no longer define her. They remind her that healing doesn't come from someone else's arms, but from learning to stand in your own. She learned that peace isn't found in perfection, but in truth. And sometimes, the truth has to break you before it can rebuild. So if you're watching this and you've ever fallen, not just in love but in life, don't look away from the pain, because maybe, just maybe, that's where you begin again. And if this story made you pause, Even just for a breath, then maybe that's your soul asking for more honesty, more stillness, more truth. If you've ever looked in the mirror and wondered, is this really the life I chose, or just the one I accepted? You're not alone. We tell stories here that dig beneath the surface, that not for drama but for meaning, for healing, for the courage to start again. If that's what you're seeking, hit subscribe. Because every week we don't just upload videos, we open quiet doors inside you that may have been locked for too long. And if you've ever rebuilt yourself from broken pieces, leave a comment below. I'm still here. Let others know they're not alone either.